This is the Mobile Insights Hub. So if you're here for the Pokemon Go meetup, it's on the 4th floor. Thank you all for being here. This is the second one of these events that we've done. We hope to continually do them once a quarter. So thank you all for being here. Quick background on Sensor Tower for folks that maybe aren't familiar. We are a mobile app data provider. So we help publishers, analysts, VCs understand the App Store. We help app developers improve their apps. So that's just a little bit about us. And I wanted to quickly go over the agenda for tonight. So we have 2 talks tonight. The first one is by one of our co-founders, Alex Malafeev. He's going to be giving sort of a state of the App Store, trends that we're seeing, sort of the overall health of the App Store, and sort of what to expect going forward in 2016. After that, we have a really special talk from the marketing and UA team at Kabam. Kimberly and Jason are going to come up and talk to you about how they self-published Marvel in China. Really cool story there. We're going to do a quick QA after Alex's talk, and then we'll do a full one at the end. We also encourage you guys to stay after. Looks like we still have a lot of drinks back there. Hang out, have another drink, talk to the speakers one-on-one. So without further ado, I'm going to invite up Alex.
Hey folks, can everybody hear me all right? I wanted to, again, give a big thanks to all the folks at Kabam for letting us use this space and preparing your own speech and talk, and really excited to hear that as well. So I wanted to talk about kind of the trends that we're seeing in the App Store and what's going on, kind of the evolution of the App Store. And you know, it's been close to 6 years of real businesses being able to build true companies and revenue on the App Store, and I feel like we've gone through 3 stages of the App Store evolution. And in the beginning of the App Store, when the iPhone was out, and it's like, what is this thing for? And when Apple opened third-party developers to work, and we really saw kind of a lot of one-hit wonders, right? You'd have your sleep personality test app or something like that, and they go up, go away, and there's a lot of dead apps with a million ratings that are from 2010. But as consumer adoption of smartphones increased, we saw kind of traditional game publisher methods go to the App Store, and part of that is like the big launches of some branded title or some specific title that was designed to make money during the first 6 months or so, and the lifetime value kind of graph flattened out really quickly, or there were even paid applications, right? And that was kind of like the second phase of the App Store, and a lot of publishers really cared about, how does our launch look like, and didn't think about long term. And kind of driven from the learnings that happened a lot in Japan, Korea, but also brought over to the United States, kind of the third phase of it, and we're in the middle of this phase right now, is really apps with a loyal audience, apps that are going to stay around for a long time, thinking not only where are we going to get the initial downloads from, where are we going to get these users, but how do we really engage with them? How do we build an audience that keeps coming back and having really high quality premium titles with good retention rates, great monetization, and kind of that mode of thinking, right? Bringing the SaaS mode of thinking to games almost. And if we think about a lot of what's happened to the App Store, games especially being the forefront of technology drove a lot of growth over the last 4 years. Here's a high-level chart of month-by-month revenue broken down by the major categories, and this is through payments that go through Apple's and Google's services, right? Gaming is leading the charge here because gaming developers in general, and especially top-tier publishers, have figured out how to really engage and monetize these audiences. But it's not only gaming that's big. Now, if we look at the top apps by revenue, top apps in here, right, we're going to see a lot of that being games, right? But if we look at apps that are not games, there's still a lot of business value being built, even through Apple's payment system, from apps like Spotify, HBO, Netflix, and so on and so forth. And kind of the story here that we're seeing is gaming is leading the charge, but a lot of other companies are taking a lot of these strategies of how to think about their audience, how to think about long-term value and potential for the business, and building great successes there, right? And we have a lot of, here's some apps that are doing really, really well, right? We have, apparently to be in media, you need to have a black background for Spotify and Netflix. But a lot of these companies are driving real business value through the App Store. Not all of them are driving it through in-app purchases necessarily. Some of them are, but if we think about Uber, right? If we think about all the social ad networks, there are different ways of really driving a lot of value from the user bases that they have. And these companies are thinking about engaging their audiences on a multi-year life cycles, right? You're not just getting these installs to start using your application and then they go away after 30 days, right? These companies that are having a lot of success, they're thinking about lifetime retention of an LTV on a multiple year scale and optimizing towards that. And this is the underlying trend, right? The really top tier gaming publishers have figured this out and been working on this for a while, and we're seeing these strategies shift over to the rest of the mobile world, right? And if we think about kind of a typical game launch, we're looking at downloads of two very famous titles, right? This is the difference between the two different models, right? Something like Angry Birds is going to have a launch and it's going to really peter out and go to a much smaller level of day-to-day downloads versus the high retention and kind of engagement from a more kind of a design for that title is going to really keep driving new users and retaining a lot of those users over time. And it, although to some degree the Angry Birds story is, they've actually went and increased their revenue quite a bit over the last couple of months by switching to different kind of monetization models, but this is kind of the story that's happening. And what is happening because of this, right? Like the revenue per download that we're seeing across all of these applications in aggregate is going up, right? And it's going up pretty dramatically. And the reason this is happening is a lot of the users that are monetizing in, say, Q2 of 2016, they might have come in Q2 of 2015 and they stuck around and now they're paying, right? And if we think about the story, we have had tremendous growth. Smartphones compared to all other devices have reached billions of consumers. We're selling, Samsung and Apple are selling a lot of these devices, but we're getting toward the slow end of that, or slow down of the sigmoid curve. There's only 6 billion people in the world, right? And we're realistically only going to reach maybe 4.5 of them with smartphones. And so we're seeing slowdown in terms of device sales, but this is only happening with the installs, right? When we think about revenue of applications and we think about what the monetization, right? As installs, this is Apple, iPad, and on the bottom, and iPhone at the top. As installs kind of slow down because there's only 200 million users in the United States that have smartphones, and half of them are Google and half of them are Apple. You can't sell any more devices. But what we're seeing is, again, publishers are getting better and better at extracting revenue from the users that are there because they're building compelling applications that will stick around for multiple years. And kind of what's happening. Here's a highlight and an example of Facebook. Facebook building, really thinking strategically and building that a platform experience, right? So Facebook, and I'm sure a lot of you know, but for those that don't know, when you're inside Facebook and you click on a link, you don't go to Safari, you don't go to Chrome, you're reading that from within Facebook. And that is strategic advantage for Facebook to keep its users inside of its platform, and that's how they can make $15-17 billion a year of mobile advertising revenue because they control that whole experience, right? And we're seeing a lot more apps as platforms as well. If we think about Line or WeChat, right? Again, they're really building an experience where they're keeping these users engaged and they're keeping them really long term, right? Once you're on these apps, they're kind of your home to the internet, kind of what Yahoo wished they could be circa 2001. That didn't work out, but these apps are succeeding because of the different dynamics of what can be done with mobile devices, right? And again, going back to the titles and applications that are taking more like the SaaS-based approach to thinking about app engagement and app monetization and really long-term life cycles. We're seeing the only true way right now in 2016 and going beyond to build an app is to think about, okay, how am I going to keep my users for the next 5 years, right? How am I going to really keep them engaged? Because everybody else that's bidding on acquisition against you or acquiring users or building on strategies thinking from the same perspective. And then again, the story here is that gaming, and a lot of folks here from gaming are leading the way with thinking about this technology and thinking about life cycles of applications. But as a lot of this knowledge gets transferred over and carried over to not as competitive industries, competitive in their own way, but not as kind of cutthroat as gaming really is, we're seeing those same strategies become the pivotal focus. And that's kind of like the thesis that we've seen in App Store. We've gone through the stages of the initial launches. We've gone through the stages of one-time thing, maybe some sort of only branded experience, to really putting your eggs in one basket, the one that'll stay around and be there for multiple years. Right? And that's the highlight of what we're seeing the App Store evolve into. And I think today they're really quick. Yeah, so that's the end. I think if you have any questions about these kind of high-level trends, I'd love to.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and take short Q&A if there's anything. Now I'm going to move into 2 questions, and then we'll do a longer Q&A after the second talk. Any questions now? Okay.
So there's a lot of talk about kind of Apple, kind of revising or revamping the App Store and discoverability. Any insights or anything, any predictions on what you think that might look like, in the next 6 months to a year?
Yeah, if you just look at kind of Apple and where they're driving. Oh yeah, I'll repeat the question. So the question was, there's a lot of talk about the App Store being revamped, and there's 2-3 million apps right now in the App Store, and same thing on Google Play, and both platforms, Apple specifically, are talking a lot about revamping and making discoverability better. And so what's going on, and why is that happening? So why is that happening? Apple is looking at device sales slowing down, but they're looking at the growth of services-based revenue, right? And they're seeing that increase tremendously. And if you look at Apple's services business and the App Store business in general, that's like a $10 billion business by itself. It's a small part of Apple, but it could be a Fortune 100 company by itself, right? And so what Apple is doing is they're trying to get in the game to stay to be the platform. Previously I'd mentioned that Facebook is really big, and if you really think about it, Facebook has truly become like the third player in mobile, right? It's not Amazon, it's not Microsoft, it's Facebook, and they've built themselves as a platform. And Apple is strategically thinking for themselves, okay, where are we going to be? How do we stay defensive for the next 5-10 years as kind of, we can't double device sales, right? And they're coming in from a perspective, okay, let's take some of the proven strategies that have worked in other industries, and let's try finally doing search ads, and let's continue collecting over time more information on the users so we can actually work with developers, right? And I was on a call with some of the Apple folks pretty recently, and we constantly talk about, ads are dying, but they're actually transforming that unit into another business unit that's still going to focus on the same core mission of working with developers, right? They're very closely guarded about what they're doing, but they're still wanting to protect that service part of it, and that's what we're seeing. All right, well, we'll save the Q&A, and Next up is Kimberly and Jason.
Thank you, Alex.
Hello, welcome to Kabam, everybody. That's us. So I run user acquisition and media spend here at Kabam. I've been here for 4 years. I started out doing their optimization and testing process, so click-through rate and click-to-download are very close to my heart. And Jason here and I have worked together for around 4 years now, the whole time. And why we're well versed on APAC is we're actually part of the Kabam publishing business, and that business brought games from the East, and we published them into the West. We built that business to 60 million in about a year and a half. So when it came time to self-publish our Manway Marvel Contest of Champions in China, we knew what we were doing. Little plug here about what we do. So user acquisition at Kabam, sort of alongside what you were talking about in terms of Facebook becoming its own platform. When you think about user acquisition and how you're getting your app out there, really your first touch point for a lot of consumers is via Facebook or YouTube. So 1 billion DAU lives in both of those places, and Facebook obviously now has a much larger ecosystem with Instagram obviously in their ad platform. So what that means is, the first time a lot of people even hear about your product is going to be through advertising, and as mobile attribution gets more sophisticated, you're going to see that it's omnipotent. So for Marvel Contest of Champions, we have spent a lot of money. If you want to scroll, I don't know if you can. We spent that money over 1.5 years. And as I mentioned, things differ by market. So Jason's going to get a little bit more into this in terms of creative testing. We partner with people like StoreMaven who are in the audience there to do click-to-download testing. We use Sensor Tower data to understand what our competitors are doing, what's happening within the app ecosystem. People like to feature our ads. This is really also just because we do a game with superheroes. So as much as I like to say that we're an awesome team, it's kind of a layup when you have Marvel. So that is what it is. Spend a ton of time testing, as the StoreMaven guys know. And we actually, our cost per install, so just why testing is important. We have the same CPI today that we had our second month of launch. We spent over $50 million in advertising, so those of you in UA know what that means. Even within saturation testing is our bread and butter. Moving on. Hi. That was my fault. I made them show that infographic. Cool. All right, so we recently self-published our Manway title, which is the Chinese version of Marvel Contest of Champions in China on iOS. Why is that interesting? We'll see. Here we go. You got me? Yeah. All right. All right, so that was in May, and basically Jason, who spent a ton of time in China and publishing, was at work one day, and I said, Jason, do you want to go to Beijing on Monday? This was Friday. He's like, no. Basically, we decided to self-publish our title there, and Jason had about 30 days to do it, and he did it really awesomely. So we scaled it to #1 downloads, which is no small feat in the Chinese market. It was very exciting for us. That was obviously bolstered by some great featuring and some UA. And then just a little bit of why China was interesting for us. So Marvel, as I said, has had over 330 million in revenue. This is without any China traffic and 80 million downloads. So that's not including a ton of APAC. Cool. So as I mentioned, APAC, and I say APAC because China is its own thing, but APAC is really interesting, especially when you look at our competitors and what they've been able to do in terms of revenue, Supercell, and what it did in Korea and other countries. It can be, half of your total global revenue these days. Recently on iOS, China overtook the US in terms of revenue. So if you're not taking it seriously, you should. And any app is taking it seriously and investing heavily. Now, I'm not saying any Western companies are doing this well. It's a very convoluted and hard market to tackle, but you need to figure it out today. So those are just some figures recently, which I was surprised to see it happen. I think projections had it overtaking the US maybe next year, so it happened rather quickly, especially when you consider that it's an Android dominant market. So for iOS and its high monetizing users to happen this quickly, you need to be thinking about it. All right, I think we have some people from one of these companies in the audience here. Yeah, why do you go with a publisher? China's super complicated. How many of you done business in China? A couple of you? We have, and it's just a completely different ecosystem. So we'll both get into this a little bit more. But your best Chinese traffic sources it's just going to be way easier to go through a publisher. We didn't go with a publisher, so I'm just going to say that. But why would you? Why would you were saying to most people, why would they do that? And if you want to go to the next slide, a little more detail. Part of this starts at the core of communication paths by culture. So if you take a look at the American communication path, you can see that it's pretty linear, maybe a little confrontational, but basically Americans lay it all out at the beginning. This is what we want. You know, they kind of talk about it after a while, and eventually get clarity. In China, you might not lay it all out. You need to establish a relationship. They're judging you, you're judging them. There's side conversations. So yeah, if you're like me, total American doing business in China, when a deal goes sideways 6 months into something you thought was good, it's a little surprising. Which is why it's good we have Jason here who speaks fluent Mandarin. So anyway, I just wanted to point out that not only is the traffic ecosystem completely different, but even how you do business. You're not going to want to go into it naive and not have somebody on your team with some kind of expertise there. You'll either not end up with a deal that behooves you, or you'll be very surprised when you think you're about to launch something. UA differences specifically, as I mentioned, your best traffic sources. So you can do a lot in the States with Facebook and YouTube, a billion DAU piece, launch it, scale, boom, you're good. Those don't exist in China. I mean, you can kind of get Facebook traffic, but it's not going to be how you get it in the States. So you have to consider that. Again, why you might work with a publisher. There are some of our partners that we work with today are totally gaining traction in China, but it's not necessarily at the scale that you need if you were going to launch Facebook or YouTube from the States. So you're just going to need to go local. That's because the platforms there are WeChat, and WeChat doesn't necessarily want to work with you as a developer. So it's a little bit different. Like in the States, you're working directly with Facebook. Even this is similar if you're doing business in Korea. Those guys are like, no, talk to this agency. I don't want to talk to you. Which is really funny for him, but wait, we're the developer. That doesn't work there. So you're going to have to work with some kind of intermediary to be able to get access to the best traffic sources. Another really big distinction for us is we run a ton of video traffic. I don't know if you guys are doing that, but obviously for a game like Marvel, it's upwards of 90% of our existing traffic. And just given the ecosystem in China with devices and those traffic sources, it's mostly display and banner advertising. So that means you're going to have to curate specific to that market.
So they asked me for a candid picture, and this is how I can find it.
He's very relaxed, but yeah, what I would say is sorry, just to go back, it helps to have a Jason that grew up in Shanghai and speaks fluent Mandarin if you're going to want to launch in China.
All right, so hi everyone. Just a quick background. I joined Kabam in 2010, so almost 6 years now. And I started, doing Facebook web advertising. So back then, we were a Facebook web company. And in 2012, we pivoted to mobile, and I started publishing in 2013. And now we're here today, publishing our own game in the Chinese market. So the first thing, I learned when I landed there is, talking to different, agencies and partners to figure out, what kind of creative should we be using, right, when we launch our ads. How many of you guys, click on ads on your mobile devices? Not many. All right, click more. All right. You guys might be seeing a lot of ads, right? But mostly, the ones that we've seen, that we've used in the U.S. store is the one on top, right? It's, you got pretty apparent. That's when the movie release of Captain America was launched. So those two characters were doing really well for us. But in China, we showed that to a partner, and they said, this, it might work in U.S., but this probably will not work in China. And then we're really trying to figure out, why, what's the difference, right? And after many iterations, we came up with one at the bottom for the Chinese market. So I now have some of the answers on the slide, but do you guys see any major differences between the two? Anybody in terms of the? Yes. So the first one's the text, right? So the bottom one, the text is actually a lot longer, and then in Chinese characters, actually the same. If it's 3 letters, it might actually convey a much longer message. So in this case, the mobile users in China, they're used to reading a lot of text for them to consume that information, right? Versus what we have on top. Another thing is the background color. So the one on top is a little bit darker, whereas the one at the bottom is much brighter, right? So as Kim mentioned earlier, so a lot of visual images in China, it's bright colors, kind of gets in your face, right? Really catches your attention. And lastly, I have is the download for free button on top, right? So it's typical call to action that we like to use a lot in the U.S., but in China, we actually looked at a lot of other competitors, some of them including Clash Royale or Boom Beach, right? They actually do not use the download button. And then after a lot of iterations and testing, this is what we came up with at the bottom. So this is something that's kind of the first task, because without ad images, no one's going to click on ads. You guys don't even click ads in general, right? So without the right images, you probably won't even look at it for too long. So that's
one comment I wanted to make along those lines in APAC is that advertising is a lot more saturated. So Facebook does a very good job delivering an even distribution of ads. And in APAC, it's just a ton of ads in your face all the time. So it's another reason for the creative differences, and why they do some offline marketing, you have to stick out from the rest of the, right? We do that through video. If you don't have that, you're just gonna have to be a lot of things in one place.
all right. So the second part of what I kind of learned is, working with the agency, definitely can help with your UA campaign. So whenever you enter a new market, right, especially in a different, continent like APAC, you're working with a totally new ecosystem, right? So again, something that Kim mentioned earlier is working with agencies that gets you direct access to premium inventory on WeChat, right? So WeChat, it's pretty much the Facebook newsfeed, right? So we were fortunate enough to get our ad on the right to get directly onto WeChat, which going to give you the biggest reach of audience, right, in the entire Chinese iOS store. And then, so many of the channels, like WeChat, they only work with agencies, and so that's kind of a plus of hiring a local partner. Of course, when you work with a local partner, you got to do profit sharing, right? So you got to think about the pros and cons and figure out what's best for you guys. So one thing that's big on WeChat is in the U.S., right? We all know games, they like to feature celebrities, right? So when Kim Kardashian or Kate Upton, right? Almost a magnitude, larger in the Chinese market. The fan base is, huge, and they're just super fanatics, right? And then the one thing that I learned is in China, it's all about relationships, right? So one time, actually the first week I got there, my coworker was telling me, yeah, his wife knows a celebrity. I'm like, which one? He said, oh, her name is Angela Baby. I don't know if anyone here has heard of her, but, oh yeah? Okay, great. So, yeah, Angela Baby, so think of Kim Kardashian, right? But even much more extravagant. So apparently her wedding is 3 times more expensive than the Kardashian wedding, right? So, and then my coworker said, yeah, my wife works in the entertainment industry, and if we can get her to somehow, agree to sponsor or, tweet about the game, then you'll probably get, millions and millions of downloads for free, right? So that's the kind of celebrity endorsement for the power of that they have in the APAC markets. Of course, it's also important to find the right endorsement, right? So on one hand, you want to have somebody with the biggest reach, but you also want hopefully a gamer, right? So with the right audience, so that their followers are actually the message you're sending resonate with the audience, right? So that's something that's I thought was interesting. And the other thing that's not here is IP, right? So with Marvel, and we were very fortunate to be working with Disney and Marvel Studio to create a title based on this huge IP, right? So, and with that, for one, we're able to feature the game in the App Store, globally in both Google and iOS store. So with that, when you guys probably seen App Store, Editor's Choice, right? Big block on top of the store, right? So that's kind of like you get millions of eyeballs during the first week of launch. So that's definitely helped us kind of gain that audience fan base, right? So not everyone is a gamer, but everyone has probably heard of like the Marvel universe, right? And then so when we launched the game, especially in the US, so every couple months during 2016, there was new Marvel movies coming out, right? So in February it was Deadpool, right? It's a very funny movie. I guess you guys have probably all seen it. In April was Captain America, and then in May or early June is the Wolverine movie, and in November we have Doctor Strange. So Marvel, they're really smart, right? They know how to kind of milk the audience with new movies every other month, right? And people like us, pretty much everyone, they kind of open up their wallets and go to the movie and see it, right? So with our IP, we're able to take advantage of that and release new content based on the movies that's coming out. So that's why, kind of all the millions of players we have, come back over and over again and continue to play our games because we have the most relevant content that's, connects with exactly what's going on in like pop culture.
But not necessarily something anyone can do. Just go get a Marvel title and get Editor's Choice. It's really easy.
Yeah, so in the App Store, you do a search, there's at least, I would say, like 5 or 6 different Marvel titles. But I'm proud to say that our game is the only one that's in the top 10 grossing. So it's it's not simply just getting a title. It's kind of like understanding what type of gameplay your users want, how to really capitalize on IP, and again, working with creative teams to really rinse and repeat, optimize the creative process. So another big channel in China is Baidu. So think of Baidu as like Google, right? So search, right? So Baidu search is one of the pretty much the biggest search engine in China. And they also have a forum called Baidu Tieba. So that's something like a Quora where you can Q&A, where you can ask questions. So when we kind of came up with the marketing strategy, Baidu is it's a small portion, but still part of our plan, right? To kind of like get the eyeballs in front of out there. So when people search Marvel or Captain America movie, our result will show up. But what happened was that the day that we're supposed to launch the marketing campaign on Baidu, though, I found out that the government actually pretty much shut down the entire advertising platform. And it was really strange, so I'm trying to figure out what's going on, right? I mean, imagine Google getting shut down, right? So apparently, there was a patient at a hospital, and they Googled something or Baidu something on WebMD, and they, based on what they read, they followed the instructions and, took some medicine that actually, unfortunately, was not really good for him, and it was actually, fatal. So he, this incident kind of just blew up right on the internet. So the government really had to kind of regulate that. So they kind of paused all the advertising, platforms on Baidu. So just imagine, Google AdWords getting shut down. So that was, a bit of a surprise.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah. But again, so that's kind of like Murphy's Law, right? Anything that, can go wrong will go wrong. So we pretty much had to reallocate that budget, to other top performing channels. It was a bit of a fire drill, but we kind of overcame it. Other interesting channels in China that we don't have in the US. One is they have these short videos. So think of it. So this one guy, he pretty much makes short videos of every single movie that's been released, right, within the last 10, 20 years in like 3-minute clips. So if you want to, get a quick overview of any movie you want, you go to his channel, right? His YouTube station or Youku station has millions of followers. So that's a channel where you would actually promote your title or your app. So because he gets a lot of eyeballs, right? Another one is what they call CPT store. It's a app review store where pretty much think of like the Apple App Store, right? But there's individual Android stores where there's people reviewing apps. But what's interesting about it is that you can pretty much just pay to buy reviews, So if you want your app to appear on top of the reviews, this is what you do. And interesting, a lot of the users from these sites are very high quality, so they've done really well, became payers.
That's just real quick. That was actually interesting behavior that we saw when we launched, was that there's a lot of apps getting to the top of the charts, but then basically the iOS store is going through and cleaning them out every single day. So you'll notice that it's pretty volatile, but not something that we were necessarily used to seeing in the US, so people doing it by bots or other ways, and then they get deleted entirely.
Yeah, so one thing that you notice in the Chinese app store, right, the top 10, it's probably like Tencent, NetEase, and a couple other games, they tend to stay somewhat similar, but after that it changes almost every other week. So then it's really difficult to remain on the top 100 chart, and the life cycles of most apps are maybe just a few months, right? So it's super competitive in the Chinese store, whereas in the US you see the top 10 guys, before Pokemon it's always been the same, right? So that's kind of one of the major differences between the two markets. So this is China Joy. So I actually just flew back from China 2 days ago. Went to the annual conference, China Joy. This is kind of like the biggest technology conference in China. I heard there's like over 300,000 people attending. So what are some like new industry trends, right? So one is VR. So VR is getting big in China. Also, you'll see that on the right, a bunch of guys sitting in a tank. It's some pretty hardcore, gaming experience. Another one is, augmented reality. So Pokemon is actually, even though it's not officially released in China, there's people playing Pokemon Go. So the way it works is that, you know how the game, it connects to Google Maps, right? But then in China, there's no Google Maps. So you can actually VPN it and pretend as if you're in SF. So when they look out there playing China, they're actually looking at the map of San Francisco. And then in order to move around, they just tap on the screen, left and right, and then kind of walk around. So they're playing Pokemon virtually, from across the globe. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. And then another kind of industry trend is consolidation, right? So you guys probably have heard with the Tencent acquisition of Supercell, right? Kind of bridging the market between the East and West. So I think over the years, consolidation is a big part in the gaming markets. And then one last thing that I noticed is that so Uber actually announced that they agreed to get acquired by its competitor Didi in China, right? That's just kind of like another example of how challenging it is for an American company to enter the Chinese market. And some of the reasons I think I know Uber tried to take over the globe, right? I think a couple of reasons that didn't quite work out is one is scale, right? So the Uber competitor Didi in China had, I think, at least like 10x the customer base. Two is kind of like, so with that, they're able to like pretty much price cut, right? So offering, which is great for customers, right? I love getting 50% off, 80% off on every single ride with Uber, and then you actually get like BMWs and Mercedes sometimes. But I guess as a company, as a business, it didn't quite work out. Another thing is, if you think about it in the past, even now, I think Apple's having it's a bit of a challenge. They're increasing sales in China, and I know that they, Apple actually invested $1 billion in the Uber competitor Didi. So it's hard, like the whole thing's connected. Just goes shows how complex, the Chinese market is. Yeah, so that's kind of like some of the new trends that I've seen in the Chinese market. And that is the end of the presentation.
All right, so if you guys have questions, we're going to come around with the mic. We're recording the event. So go ahead and raise your hands, and we'll bring the mic around.
I'll start with a question, actually. So how have you seen the extent and kind of building the expertise with targeting in China versus the rest of the world, right? Because if we think about a traditional campaign on Facebook, now you're going to really figure out your audiences and lookalike audiences and likes and interests and do that really well. How ahead or behind is China there? The methods I heard were a little bit different rather than the long-running campaign targeting specific kinds of users.
Yeah, so for targeting, I would say most of the traffic inventory we get is from other apps, so through ad networks, right? So from similar games, one's, for example, Clash of King, right? It's one of the top 10 grossing apps, both, I would say, in China and in the US for a while. So these are kind of like your most relevant audience, right? So when you show your ads inside these apps, then they're mid-core to hardcore gamers that are most likely to convert to play your game.
In terms of sophistication, though, I would say that it's a little bit Wild West in the sense that we may have accidentally been shared data that wasn't on purpose, but not necessarily for targeting versus like, again, if you're working through an agency and there isn't like a Facebook there, it's not how you would acquire here at all. And WeChat story is going to be more like a reach and frequency campaign or something versus like, here's some user IDs that you want to target, if that makes sense. It's a sheer population play too, so that's why they couple it with a lot of less targeted stuff like offline advertising as well, because just the amount of people that are able to download your game. But yeah.
Oh yeah, one thing I want to add is also like location targeting, right, by city. So in China, you have your tier 1 cities, right, Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, right, and then you kind of have a lot of cities that didn't actually have, a 4G connection until maybe like a year or two ago. So it's really important to, figure out, which cities you're actually targeting.
Lastly is the tracking partners. So I think you're going to have to work with a local tracking partner. We worked with
It's called Talking Data.
Talking Data. But why I bring that up is like a lot of that's going to be like in Mandarin, and you might not even be able to do actionable things with it. So from a U.S. office.
Hey guys, thanks so much for talking about your experiences bringing a game from the West to the East. Curious about the creative side and working with such a world-class brand like Marvel. So how did maybe it was negotiations or some sort of compromise with the fact that, Marvel has a specific brand imagery and sort of standard, while in the examples, especially in the banners that you mentioned, the imagery was so different. Was there any sort of concern from Disney or Marvel's side about like changing the brand so much, or have they maybe had some sort of like global brand guidelines in China or like other like country by country standards? Like how did that conversation sort of come out?
Yeah.
Ultimately helping your guys' UA
So,
acquisition strategies.
I would say that anytime you're working with an IP, there needs to be a level of trust within that brand. We tend to build that trust through numbers and dollars. So you might feel strongly about your brand, but do you feel $1 million strong about that brand? Probably not. And so we obviously are careful and honor the Marvel universe. You can see that in our creative. We're not going too far away from anything, but that trust needs to be there that we're going to honor it and make them the most money possible. That was established, over a year or so before we even went into the Chinese market. And then they actually have a local Disney office there that we worked with through approvals and stuff like that. But I would say that, it's sort of laying that foundation of trust and then saying like, basically anything that ventures outside of the usual, we back up with testing numbers so that they can ultimately make the decision as a licensee whether they want to whether they want to do that or not. We try and quantify it for them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so the US version of the game has been live for over 18 months now. So our team has a really good understanding of what kind of creatives that the Marvel headquarters will and will not approve. So even before we present it to them, we know like what kind of changes we're making and whether or not it's going to get okay.
Yeah, we do have to push the envelope a little bit, but usually within those conversations.
Hey, Eleanor from Sensor Tower. I was curious, I noticed there was a lot of iOS data up there, and I was curious how your Android launch in China varied, how your tactics varied, and just even the more emotional roller coaster that comes with that in China, just how that went.
So we did iOS only
Oh.
because I would not suggest self-publishing on Android. So this is just about self-publishing on iOS. The Android market is a whole other talk and conversation, as you guys know. And yeah, I think it's coming, the day where you can self-publish on Android, and maybe that's something you're going to find activations for at some point. But yeah, I would say that at this moment, I wouldn't suggest trying to tackle that ecosystem unless you have a large China presence yourself as a developer.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that. If you look at a lot of the top titles in China and you look at the App Store kind of landing page or mobile landing page, if you click download on iOS, you're gonna go to the App Store. If you click download, you're gonna actually download like an APK, and that's the way a lot of that distribution from the publishers and developers works, because it's very fragmented. There's 5-6 stores that each have market share and they're buying each other, and it's very, very complicated.
So I have a question on a little more on creative, particularly. Sorry.
I don't know how I was like.
Just looking in the corner here. Creative fatigue, right? So, and particularly video. It's like fatigue is becoming more of an issue, particularly with video. But are there any differences between the markets relative to fatigue and creative?
Yeah, so in terms of video, we actually didn't do quite much. Maybe I want to say maybe 10-15%, just because in China most of the inventory actually still display ads. Maybe over the next couple of years it will change. The majority, right now, majority inventory is still static, right? Fatigue, that definitely happens. So in the beginning you might want to test, maybe have like 2-3 versions, and every week you want to launch a new version to see which one sticks, right? So definitely that's something that especially when you have that many users, that many downloads, after a while everybody has seen the same ad, right? So you want to diversify and then try new creatives.
We definitely do pre-testing in a market before we launch though, because you will find just huge differences. So we do sneaky pull tests just to understand like what we're working with. So usually we're not going to launch with our like test hypothesis. It's going to be like we've arrived at that, and then we have like a pipeline of creative that is ready to go and iterate off of. But in terms of like how quickly the creative churned, it's actually just a function of spend. So I would say that it depends on how much you're investing in that market and impression value, like how many impressions are being served, versus like it's churning quicker in China. I don't know, would you agree with that or?
Yeah, I mean it's always a diminishing return, right? The more you spend, that your costs kind of rise, over time, and then you got to rinse and repeat and iterate.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. It was really informative. I was wondering if you could talk at all about retention and whether there are different trends between the East and West in terms of retention. Like, for example, push notifications are very big in the US, and I was wondering if in China if there are different mechanisms or if there are some mechanisms that work better or worse.
It's actually just gamer differences between the markets, and you're seeing a little more of that convergence in the US. What I mean by that is in APAC, you see a lot of gamers churning through content super quick, and they're willing to spend to discover. So you have to keep that in mind in terms of retention numbers and initial ARPU numbers. They might look really awesome, but very few games stick in those markets. So I think it's less about, when I think about things like push and email, I actually back it out into number of people you're actually accessing. So people that opt into push or email is going to be a finite number versus like aggregate game behavior is really more what I focus on, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would say that you're seeing some of that behavior in the US today too, where apps are launching and they're shooting to the top of the App Store much quicker than they would have a year or two ago. People, even the top grossing games today from Supercell and Machine Zone, they didn't heavily invest in those titles until they were out and they felt really good about their LTVs. And today you have the Clash Royales and then obviously what we have today, top grossing, that happened that night. It's just insane. And that to me is more similar to how APAC behaves, in that consumers are getting not only more used to churning through content quickly, and they're also more used to paying initially, which is different. So in terms of retention, I would say it's more that retention curve that is starting to change in the US and look a little more like APAC. Would you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think you covered it.
Hi, sorry. I have a quick question. With the ad networks that you guys worked with in China, did you have any issues with transparency in terms of sharing publisher level information? And if you did, how did you get around to optimizing that information?
Yeah, so there's I would put them into two groups, right? One are the ones that has U.S. offices, right? Like you have a lot of companies, like Adconomy, Unity, etc. They all have they're based here and they have offices in China, so that was perfectly fine communicating with them. There's also companies that's based in China only, so those kind of really have to make sure kind of pull them aside, like hey, what are the real numbers, right? So you never know what you're getting. So but then over time, because we operate on performance based, right? So if the right if there's no ROI, then we automatically will reduce spend there. So that's kind of the situation there.
Yeah, you're going to make more. Like, I feel like that precedent is important because we're going to invest more with you if the performance is there and if the appropriate tracking is in place. I mean, they can do whatever they want, but it's not going to do anything. It's a short-term play for them.
Jeannie here. So having gone through this experience, what would you do differently next time? Like, what were the key learnings that you derived from this experience, and what would you do differently next time?
So actually, this is something that's, I'm a UA person, right? But actually, we'll actually do something a little bit different about the product itself, right? So, but I'm not a product person, but it's personal opinion, right? So the game itself, it's an action fighting game, right? For those of you who's kind of like seen it, it's imagine like Mortal Kombat, right, or Street Fighter, something like that. So this kind of gameplay is, it's not as popular in Asia as here. So in Asia, what's the biggest genre is RPG, right? So that's kind of like, whereas here, RPG is not as big. So then in China, a lot of users you have a lot of players, they download the game, they check it out, but the engagement is actually not as strong as here. So I think, and another thing is that Chinese players, or especially out of APAC, they want like really deep, complex kind of like systems, right? So those are the elements that you have in an RPG title. So I think with the right, kind of game genre as well as the advertising, then you're able to build a game that's fit for the local audience.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we would have probably, we'll do this with upcoming products, but you need, you can't beta in China specifically, so you need a proxy like Taiwan or something to, a beta sort of answers these things that Jason was talking about, but I definitely would want to understand a little more from a product perspective. And then just from an overall global entertainment perspective, you have this convergence of genres in terms of movies. So Marvel's very successful here, it's very successful there for movies, but that convergence isn't really there yet in terms of gaming. As Jason mentioned, you have RPGs with $21 RPIs. You're not going to see that with an action game is more niche there. So in terms of just download velocity and overall revenue, it's going to be different than the US. And I think we learned a lot about even where those markets are at now, today, that would frame our future investments different.
And I wanted to add, number one grossing title in China, although there was a title that recently that came out that pushed NetEase's Fantasy Westworld Journey. And there's even two versions of that app, like kind of like a softcore version and a hardcore version. Very detailed mechanics and it's almost an MMORPG. It's not even an RPG. It's an MMORPG. You control a lot of characters. Just the kind of titles that we're seeing succeed in China and APAC are very different. They're much longer engaging and very, very hardcore for the most part.
For sure.
All right, any final questions? All right, join me in thanking our speakers for coming.